Rand manipulation, bank stealing, R1 trillion a day. All week long, South Africans have been reading news headlines and posts on X/Twitter about the accusations against 28 local and international banks that they colluded to manipulate the South African currency, the Rand, for their own gain, for their own profits in ways that were detrimental to the rest of and the vast majority of South Africa's more than 60 million people. But what is Rand manipulation? How do you manipulate a currency? What do the banks stand accused of? And why do people keep talking about R1 trillion a day? Well, welcome to The Issue with Dan Corder, where we explain and unpack what we know so far about Rand manipulation. Because a massive factor right now is that the organization, the Competitions Commission and the Competition Tribunal that has made these findings against these banks and is doing the investigations has yet to reveal its full report. But we do know quite a bit so far. So let's talk about the banks. Let's talk about Rand manipulation. This is The Issue with Dan Corder. It's South Africa's watch party because you and I both know that South Africa is a movie. So every week, come watch it with us as we unpack the biggest issues, scandals, and crises facing the nation. If it's your first time here, please just do us the solid of clicking subscribe. It makes a huge difference as we develop the show. Right, let's get into it. So in March 2023, South Africa's Competitions Tribunal added 9 more banks to a list of 19 local and international banks that included like Credit Suisse and Barclays and Bank of America. And the accusation was that these 28 banks had colluded between 2007 and 2013 to manipulate the Rand for their own profit. Trying to manipulate the market for foreign exchange is a massive deal. This is basically how it works. Whenever you want to do business with somebody in another country who uses a different currency to your country, you both need to find a common currency to do the buying and selling, the trading in. And generally, people trade in dollars. So if you are a South African wanting to do business with somebody overseas, even if they're not in America, you generally have to go and take the rands that you have and buy dollars. And banks play a massive role in how most people buy foreign currency. They often have their own foreign currency that they trade on their own behalf, but they often create channels through which everyday South African or businessmen around the world can do easy foreign exchange purchase and trade. And through these processes, they make profit, they make commission. And in our fundamentally globally interconnected world where virtually all goods and services and industries are involved in international trade, the foreign exchange market for currencies to do deals in has a massive effect on a ton of industries. It's obviously imports and exports, but it's a ton of other things, including direct foreign investment, public and private debt, financial assets, and the price of many goods and services. So what's collusion and how does colluding generally work? Well, ideally in capitalism, the way that prices are regulated is that a bunch of companies are competing to provide you a good, a product, a service. And they try to compete to get your business instead of you going somewhere else in 2 ways. The first way is they increase quality. So they say our stuff is literally better than the other stuff. And the second way they do that is they drop price. So that's how it's supposed to work. But unfortunately, sometimes companies that are all providing the same product, and I'm going to use bread in this example, say all the bakeries in a country that are providing all the bread for the entire population stop competing with each other, thereby driving up quality and driving down price. Instead, they all secretly agree to all raise their prices together and keep them similar, which means that none of them is out competing each other on price. But what that means is if you want to buy bread, you have to buy from one of these bread makers and all of them have raised their price. And so you have to swallow the price that they're selling the bread at, which means that all of these colluding companies make more money. And it screws the consumer. So in the vast majority of countries in the world, there are laws in place against collusion because they don't want people to get screwed over by creators of goods and services who then dominate the market so that nobody else can get in and then all agree to raise the prices. That is literally what South Africa's Competitions Commission and Competitions Tribunal is for. So let's apply this to the market for foreign exchange. There are all of these different banks, 28 banks trying to convince you, a South African business person who wants to do business with somebody overseas, to go and buy foreign exchange through their channel that they have created for you. And if they're all competing with each other, then they're going to try to undercut each other and attract your business by offering lower rates. But then that means that even if they get your business, they're making less money, less commission per transaction. But what if all the banks secretly got together and agreed that they would all raise their prices for doing foreign exchange? So then you, as the business person, don't have a cheaper bank to go to. No matter what bank you go to, it's going to be expensive because they've fixed the value, manipulated the value of the rand away from the competitive market so that they get bigger commissions, bigger personal profits. That's what the Competitions Commission is accusing these banks of doing. So the banks made it harder and more expensive to do business with South Africa and South Africans. They made it harder and more expensive for South Africans to do business with other businesses around the world, other governments, other countries. And that naturally had a negative effect on South Africans' lives, our economy, because it was more expensive to do business. It was more expensive to import and export goods. It was more expensive to get the kinds of goods and services that make South Africans' lives better into South Africa because they had spent more of their budget on doing the forex, the foreign exchange. So the banks colluded to take money off of all parts of the South African business world and the South African economy. That's what they did, and we all suffered. And the Competitions Commission claims that they have evidence of the banks actively colluding. They say that they have primary evidence. That means the literal original evidence of 158 chats between all 28 banks over a 7-year period. So that's not the only way to manipulate the value of a currency. There are other ways. Say, for example, there are massive companies. Let's say, for example, a mining company that needs to do international trade and so needs to buy an enormous amount of foreign currency, usually dollars. So what they usually would do is go to all the banks and find the one that gives them the best rate, the lowest added cost, and therefore the lowest commission for the bank, for the massive business of a whole mine and all of its product getting their foreign exchange through this bank. That is how capitalism is supposed to make competition to drive that price down. But if all the banks are secretly colluding, then they can strike agreements where they pass around customers for all of their own benefit to guarantee that they all have work. Let's take this mining company example. So what could potentially have happened is that maybe the mining company comes along and all the banks in secret go, cool, this mining company needs work through one of us. It's your turn. And that bank will drop its rate of work a little bit, its cost, its price, and all the other banks will keep theirs a little higher, which basically pushes the mining company in this case, or any business, into working with that bank. And then for the next client, it'll be a different one. And that allows them to maintain higher prices while they all continue to get work. And the smallest price change can make an enormous difference to these massive companies who are trading at huge scale. In fact, it's estimated that even a 1 cent difference in an inflated bank currency trade can cost a mining house or similar sized company thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of US dollars over time. And obviously, because massive companies like mining houses were spending way more to just do the business that they were doing, that took away budget from all the other stuff that they could be doing that once again could have been contributing to South Africa's economy and our nation's prosperity. So, where are we now? A bunch of banks are testifying before the Competitions Commission and Tribunal. A couple of banks have already paid fines. Standard Chartered Bank paid an over 40 million rand fine for what they did. But the way that these banks are treating the South African authorities looks really ugly. Standard Chartered Bank itself paid the US authorities over 530 million rand in fines in 2019. And they've been quibbling and bartering to pay only just 42 million rand to the South African authorities this year. And the evidence is damning. Advocate for the state Tembeka Tobi, when speaking to Judge Dennis Davis, who was presiding over these proceedings of the Competitions Commission, said that there just was a chat room, and the purpose of the chat room was to strike deals and negotiate terms on all these banks manipulating the market, manipulating the rand. They just did it. Fortunately now, Standard Chartered is going to be a witness in the prosecution's case as the commission goes after the other banks and tries to really understand how much money was taken, how much the rand was manipulated, and what the economic fallout for the country has been. So how much has this affected the South African rand and the economy? Well, it definitely has had an effect. It's too soon yet to say how much of an effect. But one thing that is definitely true is that while the banks were manipulating the rand, negatively affecting trade between South Africa and South African business, the negative effects were being felt by everyday South Africans. And those banks that were making these illegal, horrible, horrifying profits were doing so while repossessing South Africans' homes, repossessing their cars, leaving them mired in crippling debt. One thing that must be cleared up though, and it's been spreading like wildfire, and it's just wrong. Many South Africans have seen and come to believe that these banks, the whole cartel together, were making like R1 trillion a day between 2007 and 2013. There's been a lot of confusing media press about this, a lot of confusing quotes from authority figures, but I just need to tell you, there is no way that these banks were making R1 trillion a day. Here's some context. R1 trillion a day would have meant 365 trillion rand a year that these cartels, these 28 banks were making, just off of messing with the South African rand's value for their own gain. To take a year from the period when the banks were manipulating the rand, 2007, let's say that they were making R1 trillion a day. That's 365 trillion rand a year. And it was about 8 rand to the dollar in 2007. So 365 trillion rand a year divided by 8 is around 45 trillion US dollars. That is how much this cartel would have been making a year if they were really making R1 trillion a day. 45 trillion US dollars. But the entire gross domestic product for the whole world in 2007 was 59 trillion US dollars. So when combining everything that everybody in the whole world made in 2007 was around 60 trillion US dollars, there is no way in the world, it is impossible that 28 banks colluding to manipulate one relatively minor weak currency in the world were making 45 trillion US dollars. There is no way that 28 banks could account for 3/4 of all of the money being made in 2007. There's been a misunderstanding and it is spread as an incorrect fact like wildfire across South Africa. It is absolutely not possible that these cartels were making R1 trillion a day. Please tell everybody, because too many people think this. So that's the issue with rand manipulation. Thank you so much for watching The Issue with Dan Corder. I'm sure that more information will come out in the coming weeks, months, probably years on this story, and we'll make sure to keep you informed as all of the new info comes out. Please, if you have a second, again, please click subscribe if you enjoyed this or found this in any way useful, because it's a small click for you that costs you nothing, but it really makes a big difference as we develop this project. And remember that every single episode of The Issue that comes out every single week, a new topic, a new issue, is available on podcast. Also a longer analysis on Spotify and on Apple Music. See you next week.